So the first thing that I'm pin fitting is the front of the back. So this is like the back of the seat and then the back of the chair. And what I'm going to do, so I've got 3 pieces of fabric to work with since we've got 2 pieces in the back and 1 in the front. And what I'm going to do is pinch them together along the edge of the chair and just stick a pin where those meet. Like this. And you want to pin it so that it's really tight against the chair. This is how you get a nice fitted slipcover. So you want to be pretty precise with your pins and use a lot of them because the pins are what's going to hold it together before you bring it over to the sewing machine. And as you're pinning, you want to check to make sure that you're not pulling the fabric to the point where you're not leaving yourself enough fabric on the other side. So as I'm pulling the fabric here, I want to make sure that the fabric still is going to meet the seat down at the bottom, and it's also going to cover all the way to the bottom edge of the chair in the back. And then these pins become the line that I'm going to sew against, or sew along. So I'll remove the pins and then sew right along them. Now some people like to put their pins in perpendicular to where they're going to be sewing so they can just sew right over them. But I prefer to put my pins in like where my actual stitches are going to go so that it holds it together nice and tight. And then I know exactly where I want to sew. And then you want to pin just a little bit beyond so that when this panel of fabric meets up with the other one, it's there's not going to be any kind of gap or anything. So I've pinned it all the way to the edge. And then I'm going to grab my scissors and cut along that pin line, leaving just about a 1/2 inch of seam allowance or so. And this does a few things. First of all, we get rid of some of this bulk, so it's easier to see how the slipcover is fitting. And also, if, let's say you're sewing and you're taking out the pins and you run out of bobbin thread, all you have to do is match up the 2 pieces of fabric because you cut them together after they were pinned. And then I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine. I just spilled my pins again. Do you see them? They just they just took a dive off the back end. Anyway, so then I'm going to sew along this pin line here, removing all the pins. And we're going to work on this section by section. So I'm just going to sew this section and then we'll start pinning the sides and one of the arms. So I just finished sewing this edge, and each time after I finish sewing, I like to just try it on just to make sure that it's fitting right. So we need to turn it right side out in order to do that. So now I'm going to turn it back so that it's inside out again. So when you're doing this pin fitting method, we're essentially making the slipcover inside out. We're using the slipcover like our dress form. We're using the chair as our dress form. So we work everything so it's inside out, and that's so these raw edges aren't showing. If we were making it right side out, you'd have all these raw edges sticking out. So I'm going to fit now all of this back on, and I'm going to pin the sides next. These are the wings. And I've got them pinned to the chair just so they stay in place. And then I'm going to start pinning this wing here. Okay, so I have the back and the sides of both of the wings all sewn. So now I'm going to turn the chair around and start working on the inside of the back and the wings here. So I have pinned the outside of the wings in place just with some pins here, and that's just so while I'm working on the slipcover it's not going to flop. Helps everything to sort of stay in place. So I'm going to pin this, the inside of the wing, to the inside of the back here. And again, it helps if you have all of your fabrics sort of in place so that you make sure that, like, I don't want to pull too much on this side and then I don't have enough fabric over here, which I have done before, and then you have to get the seam ripper out and it's very frustrating. So I'm going to stick a pin right there just to make sure I don't pull it too much. And I'm going to make sure that this piece of fabric is nice and straight. All right, now it's a little tight and bunchy up here, so I'm just going to make a little cut so that the fabric can sort of follow the curve of the chair a little bit easier. And now I'm going to get this piece pinned in. Now the trick about pinning is to make sure that your raw edges are all always facing the same direction. As long as you do that, then everything should be fine. And especially when I first started working on slipcovers, I remember I'd pin a whole bunch of stuff together and then I'd go sew it and I would just sort of, you know, hope that it would just work out. I wasn't really sure what I was doing, and I was always impressed how if I just sort of followed some basic principles of just, you know, pinning along the line, making sure I kept the fabric nice and straight, all of that, that it just always worked out. It was like magic. So I'm going to make sure, another key to making sure that the slipcovers fit really well is to make sure that you really make sure that your fabric is hugging the chair. So before I pin it, I'm really pushing it down into the inside of this crease here where the two pieces of fabric meet. And the reason why I'm doing that is if I pin them so they're a little bit away from the chair, then once I sew it and put it back on, the fabric's going to kind of pull. It's not going to fit as well. So you want the fabric to really be tucked into the inside corners like this. And be careful when you're cutting the fabric to make sure that you're only cutting what you actually want to cut. I've done that too. I've gotten like 3/4 of the way through a slipcover and then I'm trimming off some fabric and I end up, you know, cutting a big slit down the back. Which, talk about frustrating. It is so frustrating. Okay, and now I'm going to repeat the exact same thing on the other side.